Good afternoon, everyone. I cordially welcome you all for the fourth lecture of the short course on cultural linkages towards an Asian ideology. Today, we are focusing on building an Asian community, political issues, and challenges. The agenda for today is such that the lecture is scheduled to be for 45 minutes with a short break of 5 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now have the honor of introducing our guest lecturer, Mr. Nuwan Herath, Head of the Department of Social Sciences of the Faculty of Management, Social Sciences and Humanities at the General Sir John Kotlawala Defense University. Our esteemed guest holds a Master of Arts in Peace Studies from the University of Notre Dame in the USA and a Master of Arts in Conflict, Peace and Development Studies from the Tribhuvan University in Nepal, and a Bachelor of Arts in Peace and Conflict Resolution with a first class from the University of Kelaniya in Sri Lanka. Mr. Nuwan Herath is a senior academic in the field of social sciences with many years of experience teaching at university level. He has contributed his vast academic knowledge to the real world by conducting research on monastic reforms, post-war Sri Lanka, and human rights violations, to name a few. He has also been awarded scholarships by NORAD and the Joanne B. Kroc Institute in the USA for his postgraduate studies. In addition to his role at KDU, he holds and has held positions at the Sri Lanka Air Force Academy, the University of Kelaniya, the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame, and the Constitution Assembly election in Bhojpur in Nepal, and the Foundation for Coexistence in Sri Lanka. Sir, we are profoundly honored to have you with us here, and we warmly welcome you to deliver this lecture. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nihara, for that introduction. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right, so I would actually like to, first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Hemantha Premaratne for once again inviting me to do this lecture on political issues and challenges in Asia. So thank you very much, Dr. Hemantha and the project team of Eurasia Project for giving me this opportunity. So today in this particular session, I will be touching upon some of the pressing political issues and challenges that Asia is facing at the moment. Right. So now this particular course is the intention of it actually to discuss about this this concept of Asianness, or building a kind of a sense of Asian community. So the intention of the course is to identify what are the cultural linkages or cultural roots or commonalities that can be seen across Asian communities to build a kind of a common sense as Asians. So then when we, normally we claim ourselves as Asians. So, but very few of us are actually aware what does it really mean and what are the sort of commonalities that we have across the cultures. So in that sense, it's a very timely and a very interesting intervention by the Eurasia Foundation and KDU. So in this particular session, I will be actually talking about some of the issues and challenges that might hinder that kind of a effort, or that might challenge building a one Asianness. right? Because there are a lot of political issues and challenges that the Asia as a community and also as a political entity is facing. So I'll be touching upon some of the political issues with respect to that. So what do I mean by building an Asian community? Building healthy relationships and structures among people and nation states in Asia with a positive sense of Asianness. So having healthy relationships among Asian communities and also having a positive sense of Asianness is what I really mean by Asian community. Sometimes, this colonial interpretations or colonial definitions about Asia is sometimes not so very pleasing to the Asians. Because with the colonialism, colonial writers have written about Asia with some negative connotations also. So some of the Asians, actually, we have also to a certain extent have internalized those interpretations as well. For example, this depicting Asia as mysterious place, a place where there is a lot of occult practices, mysterious practices, hard to discern. That kind of interpretations are also there. Scholars like Edward Said have talked about this concept of Orientalism, where this Western gaze towards Asian communities and African communities, and how that particular gaze comprised of certain prejudices about Asians, right? So we Asians also sometimes may be having some of those prejudices that Westerners had on Asians have been internalized. And we might have maybe using the same prejudices against some of the other fellow Asian communities as well. Anyway, this building a positive sense of Asianness or common understanding among Asians is a very challenging task as well, particularly when we consider issues or dividers related to some of the important social, religion, social, cultural, and political aspects, such as religion, language, ethnicity, right, regionalism, and so on, right? All these things can be connectors. For example, religion can be a great source of connectivity where people can interact with each other. But on the other hand, religion can also be a divider, right? So today in current world, we see a lot of violence perpetrated against different believers or disbelievers, right, by certain religious groups. So in that sense, this religion, language, ethnicity, these aspect of our social life have a kind of an ambivalent nature also. They can be connectors or they can be sources of peace. They can help us to build a common sense. On the other hand, they can also support, or they can also become dividers. They can support or contribute in a negative way to perpetrate violence and extremism against others also. So since given the fact that Asia is a diverse society and it's also the largest continent, we see these two things. Sometimes there are connections and also there are a lot of dividers. So what we see today, what we are going to see today is how certain aspects of our social life like religion, ethnicity, politics have kind of created some issues and challenges to sort of build this Asian community. What really prevents building this sense of Asianness. Right. So, so these are some of the main issues that I will be touching upon. So this session will briefly discuss on ideological differences in Asia. I will give you an overview of that. And there is also competition among Asian states for regional dominance and dominance even in the global level. So there is competition for dominance. There are a number of ongoing civil wars in Asia and other unresolved political conflicts. Some of the long-standing political conflicts in the world exist in Asia. And there are also issues related to modernization, or there is resistance to modernization. Certain communities in Asia, they resist the modernization or globalization or some new changes that world see. They really sort of don't want to modify their social life. So then that has led to conflicts with other ethnic communities. And there is also a lot of evidence related to this politics of inequality with respect to resource distribution. So all these issues kind of pose a lot of challenges, and we will discuss how, what are the ways that these issues can be addressed, right? So how do we see these things and these actual challenges, and how do we see some kind of a transformation or transcendence to these issues? It's not easy because there is no sort of a mantra or particular recipe to overcome these issues. These are global issues, regional issues. So we'll see what are these issues and how challenging they are if we are to think about kind of a one Asianness or Asian community. Right. So first one is ideological differences. So ideology or political ideology means a particular system of political thought that influence social movements, governments, and social groups, right? So in Asia, there are so many political ideologies embedded in different societies, different cultural groups, and even with governments and with political actors, right? So there is a huge variation of ideologies in Asia. If we even take this Marxist ideology, there are different variations of them, like Leninist, Maoist ideologies. There are liberal countries, they are very much influenced by liberal political thought. Islamist or Islamic countries are there. Strong nationalist ideologies are there. These different ideologies have dominated nation states in Asia for a long period of time, and some of the ideologies are very much contradictory or contrasting to each other. And there are countries that that are in proximity to each other. We are having different or contrasting ideologies. So if we take, for example, North Korea and South Korea, or maybe India and China, or maybe Afghanistan and India. So there are, ideologically, the ideological basis of these countries are very much different, right? So these ideologies influence a lot of other things, because ideologies are the ones that are underneath, like an undercurrent, that affect so many aspects of political life, like policy making, public attitude, external relations of a country. Ideology can influence. So how Asians can transcend these ideological differences, it's really a challenge. So, for example, if you think of Western Europe, we don't necessarily see that kind of a ideological diversity in those societies. Of course, there are different ideologies, but when it comes to more predominant ideologies, there is some kind of a similarity can be seen. But Asia, it's in that sense is very diverse. So this particular diagram kind of gives us an idea about how ideologically Asia is different. Some leftist Marxist countries are there. Right wing or left wing, right wing ideas, so more liberal ideological bases are there in certain countries. Some countries, those who are depicted in black or gray, they may be having a strong nationalist and Islamic ideologies also. So Asia, in that sense, I mean, this diagram does not capture everything, but this can give you a kind of an idea of how the Asia is divided in terms of overarching ideologies in different countries. So Asia, in that sense, is a very diverse place. Right. So then ideology kind of influence, they affect the formation of political systems, right? So ideology is a kind of, the thought process that support the formation of more materialistic practices. Like, for example, ideology can support formation of different types of government. So political systems are the ones that practice ideology in real world. So ideology support certain political system or systems of government to emerge, right? So Asia, in that sense, contains a range of different political systems, right? And they characterize the nature of the nation states, right? So there are some strong democracies in Asia, like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. Sri Lanka is also a democracy. Sri Lanka is also considered as the oldest democracy in Asia. But in terms of recognizing it as a strong democracy, there are some questions that raised by certain think tanks and those who really study this, the performances in democracy. But Sri Lanka is considered as a democracy also, because if you think about this, this democracy index, I can show you this particular. This is a Wikipedia page. So certain think tanks have categorized, these different democracies. So some countries are considered as full democracies. Some are flawed democracies. That means they are democracies, but they have certain flaws. And there are hybrid regimes. They have characteristics of democracies and also authoritarian regimes. Right. So if you think of Asia, now this is the kind of regional differences. So if you go to North America, Western Europe, they are very much the same, like either democracies or flawed democracies. Right. But when you go to other regions, Central Europe, the colors are changing, right? So green is, I hope you have captured the colors, right? So more authoritarian means towards maroon and brown, right? So if you go towards Central Europe, Eastern Europe, then slightly changing the colors, different countries now, then Latin America, it's different, Asia and Australia. See how, this, it's a kind of a mix of democracies, flawed democracies, hybrid nations, and then authoritarian states. So Africa, it's more into this authoritarian tendencies. So that is um, one way of looking at. So Asia has some democracies, strong democracies, and then also it has some famous dictatorships like North Korea, military regimes like in Myanmar, right? So these are some of the pressing challenges. Like, for example, these dictatorships, military regimes are not the kind of regimes that are sort of preferred by the rest of the world, right? So normally, the democracy is what is the, even though it has problems, it is the kind of system that is commonly accepted in the world, right? So then there are constitutional monarchies in Asia. Japan is a kind of it's a strong democracy, and also it has a constitutional monarchy. So there is a kind of a constitutionally recognized king in those countries, but they function as democracies. And there are absolute monarchies also in Asia, like Saudi Arabia. The democratic space is very low. And there is also one party rule, like in China, where there is no multi-party democracy, and the Chinese Communist Party is in charge of China, right? So these different types of systems are there in Asia. So in terms of that, Asia is, again, it's very a diverse context, right? So how, these things going to affect this building one nationness, right? That is a challenge. Or if Asia to sort of think of a kind of a great sense of regionalism, like the European Union, whatever, these regime differences in systems of governance will certainly come into effect, right? So because these systems of government shape the political culture, and when there are like stark differences, the cooperation becomes very difficult. For example, the cooperation between a dictatorship and a liberal democracy can be it's a very difficult thing to imagine, right? So even though there are strong cultural linkages, these differences can set the communities apart in Asia, and cooperation and maintaining close relationships would be very difficult. So the classic example is North Korea and South Korea. There are so many cultural linkages between these two countries. There are so many relations divided in these two countries. Kinship ties are there. But still, because of these systems of government, these people have been like set apart for a long period of time now. So the next aspect is in Asia, there is also this competition for dominance. The Asia is experiencing power struggles, particularly with respect to India and China. So it has actually never been like this. Now this is a new thing that Asia, particularly South Asia, will face in future because of the emergence of China and India as superpower. So China is already a global superpower, and India probably it's going to be a superpower. It's already a regional superpower. So in that situation or in that context, how it would affect the other countries? If there have been a lot of disputes between India and China with respect to their borders. They have a Sino-Indian war in 1962, and then they have a number of disputes in Himalayan region with respect to the borders. And also this Tibetan issue, this Dalai Lama being in India. So that is another ongoing issue in between these two countries. So Sri Lanka is probably one country that has, pretty much affected by this, the competition for dominance by these two superpowers, particularly when it comes to small countries like Sri Lanka. How those countries would think about their foreign policy. How are they going to manage their foreign affairs, right? In a situation where two of the strong countries, they are competing for dominance in the region. That's very much a kind of a challenge that small countries like ours will face in time to come, and already they are facing. So this challenge will get more and more intensified in future, right? So these countries are kind of traditional rivals, right? So they had this competition, but now when this traditional rivalry continues into next level, when these two countries are becoming more and more powerful countries or superpowers, then if they do not sort of manage those, whatever the border disputes and political differences that they have, then it will be a serious problem. So how these two countries will manage their old disputes will be crucial to the rest of the region. So anyway, this dominance of China or India is not a kind of a new thing as well, according to some scholars, because it's kind of going back to a default stage where, like, before the Europeans came into these regions, it was these countries are the ones that dominated, even though there was no sort of unified country called India. But kingdoms and empires in these regions continue to dominate. So it's not kind of a new thing as well. But rather than sort of having a strong Western influence, the Western influence will, for example, the United States kind of intervening to South Asia through India nowadays. So it is through India that USA kind of, deal with other countries. So in that scenario, the role of these two countries, their power struggle is going to be very crucial, particularly to South Asian context. So the next important challenge that Asia is facing is its internal civil wars, right? Or what you call these complex emergencies. So civil wars or internal conflicts, right, are also, even though we call them internal conflicts, they are not really internal because they have an international dimension also. So better to say they are kind of internationalized internal conflicts. No civil war is nowadays, it's a kind of a completely an internal conflict, because there are various outside parties involved. So they are no longer problems that are confined to those respective countries, right? So Asia is one place or one political entity that has entangled with so many instability and civil wars. as a region, mainly due to various issues of governance, and also to a certain extent colonialism has also contributed to that. We'll discuss that in later. So there are a number of ongoing civil conflicts in Asia. Some of them I have listed for your information. Myanmar has got an internal conflict with respect to this Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine State in Myanmar. That has a kind of a regional aspect also because of this influx of refugees into other countries, and that had led to a kind of a serious humanitarian crisis in South Asia. Then Indonesia, this Papua conflict, this separatist movement for West Papua, that has been also kind of a continuing conflict in the Indonesia. The Philippine, the Moro conflict, the Philippine civil conflict, that is for a separate state of Mindanao. So Philippine, it's also kind of an old conflict starting from 1960s onward, a complex conflict. There is a kind of a Marxist movement also, and also ethnic Muslims are like claiming for a separate state of Mindanao. War in Afghanistan has now again resumed, probably may have kind of reached to a situation where it was in the early. We never know how it will evolve in the future. The Taliban had taken over. I'm sure, pretty much sure that most of you are aware of it and have seen a lot of videos and footages of scenes in Afghanistan, terrible scenes in Afghanistan actually. So how Afghanistan is going to be in the coming years, right? Definitely it will going to affect the region. Afghanistan is part of the SAARC part of the SAARC region and a part of the SAARC committee also. So, and what about the Afghanistan's Taliban regime and their future? How are they going to deal with some of the other Islamic groups in future? What would be their relationship with the West, United States? What would be the role of the United States, China, and Russia? So you see there's a lot of international attention on some of these countries and interventions. So there have been this Afghan war for several decades now. So it's a very much of an uncertainty that is actually at the moment in Afghanistan. So it's a very, very much of a challenging situation, particularly for some of these regional powers also, like India, how India is going to be affected by this new political development in Afghanistan. Right. So Iraq, ISIL or ISIS insurgency in Iraq, it is kind of the epicenter of Islamic terrorism also, Iraq and Syrian region. And there is a connection to Afghanistan as well. So still, these countries have not sort of settled as, fully fledged states. They are in state of a failed state, right? So a lot of failures. So a failed state means it's a kind of a complete crisis of everything: the public life, transportation, quality of life, all the basic requirements for people to live. All these things have collapsed in those states. So when these pressing problems will end, that's a major question that Asia as a region is facing. Thailand also has this problem in South Thailand. Some of the Muslim minorities in south of Thailand wanted self-autonomy because they claim that their areas were sort of acquired by acquired when the Thailand was formed as a state. So there is a kind of an insurgency. Syria and Iraq, again, it's part of the same issue. And war in Yemen, this conflict between these different Islamic faiths, Sunnis and Shias, particularly supported. There is this power struggle. The Iranians and the Westerners kind of got involved in a power struggle in Yemen. So these issues are not simple issues. They are complex political emergencies that Asia as a region is facing. So what are the main issues that lead to civil wars or complex emergencies, right? So I have listed out some issues. They do not explain everything, but primarily there are issues with respect to state formation, right? So when some of these states were created, some of them are maybe after the colonial masters have left. So there are issues related to state formation in Asia. States kind of failing to manage the relations between ethnic majorities and minorities, right? So state formation or statecraft is an art, right? So how states take the consent of its majorities and minorities to the state, right? So when states having internal conflicts also mean that the very states that having those conflicts have failed to get the consent of its own people or get the consent of its ethnic majorities or minorities to the state. So there is a kind of an issue related to the ideological control of these people, because people need to be loyal to the state. So issues of state formation lies at the center. And then as a result of it, then when minorities and majorities, when they bargain for power sharing and distribution of power, it will lead to conflicts, right? So then again, issues related to constitutions, how power sharing agreements can be arranged in constitution, lack of constitutional reforms, and also some of these Asian states had long what do you call this dictatorships, for example, in Syria, Bashar al-Assad's government. So this transition of power did not take place. So one single leader continuing, one single party continuing for long periods of time had led to bad governance and corruption, and these leaders have also favored certain groups of people, which led to minority and majority tensions, and inequalities in resource distribution also had led to emergence of these conflicts. So when there are such situations, when there are such tendencies, it will also become a kind of a fertile ground for international other actors or other groups to come and intervene. And that is what exactly had happened with respect to some of the states in Asia. So it is also very easy to sort of blame maybe other international actors for intensifying some of these problems, unless there was sort of a fertile ground for them to come and play power politics, right? There won't be any intervention. So that ground has been created in those countries. The weak states, fragile states, bad governance, dictators, issues related to state formation, issues related to democracy had created the fertile ground for conflicts to emerge and foreign actors to come and intervene. So those are some of the pressing issues. So if Asia to see a kind of an end to these issues, it's not an easy way out, right? But it is not also impossible, because if we take some of the regions, like for example, Western Europe, Western Europe was one of the most violent regions a few centuries ago. There were like world wars, 30 years war, 100 years war. A lot of European nations fought against each other, but now Europe is the most peaceful, Western Europe is the most peaceful region on earth. So why that transformation? One of the most peaceful regions on earth. So why that transformation? What led to that transformation? So those things I think need to be studied critically in order to understand any way out of these problems. It's not a kind of an easy way out because a lot of actors are involved in Asia. If you think about the Middle East and Afghanistan, it's really difficult to sort of think of a kind of a way out. Right. So before we go for a break, I also want to just draw your attention to some of the unresolved and extended political conflicts that Asia is experiencing. Now, before we talked about civil wars, more conflicts which are more internal in nature, but these problems are very much interstate in nature, right? India-Pakistan issue on Kashmir, that has been one of the long-standing dispute that has not been resolved, that started with the independence of India and Pakistan in 1940s. So Kashmiri people, they want to have a kind of an independent Kashmir, some of them, but there is this Indian control and Pakistan control Kashmir. And it's also the Indian control Kashmir is considered as one of the largest military occupations in the world. And there are a lot of reports on human rights violations and violence in those areas. So the rivalry between these two countries are continuing, and this disputed region of Kashmir, the people of Kashmir have been suffering for a long period of time, and still there is no kind of a lasting solution to this political dispute between the two countries. The Tibetan issue, the China's acquisition of Tibet into China, so this Dalai Lama being in India, sort of leading this global movement for an independent Tibet, it's also again continuing, and which has also led to a kind of a problem between the two countries, India and China. The South China Sea is another problem where there is a lot of international intervention and attention also. A number of countries, claiming for, this South China Sea, Vietnam, China, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Taiwan. It's a kind of a, issue where a lot of countries are involved, and also United States, because of its close relationship between Philippines, is also involved with who controls the South China. Particularly, it's a kind of a very busy sea route as well. So South China Sea, it's another lasting political dispute in Asia. And of course, the well-known issue between North Korea and South Korea. North Korea being a communist regime, and this one family control over there. And it has been a kind of a close country to the rest of the world. And on the other hand, South Korea being a democracy, which is very much exposed to the world and also achieve this capitalist development, and also having close relationship between the Western world. On the other hand, North Korea is a close ally of China and Russia. So these two countries, they have relatives and people of the same blood and same nation, but due to politics, particularly with respect to Second World War and Cold War. These two countries have also divided. So these are some of the unresolved and continuing interstate disputes that mean they are in Asia for last several decades. Some of them for a very long period of time. Right. So with that, I think we can go for a short break for about 5 minutes. These are just things for you to think about, and also kind of an overview of how Asia, the political disputes in Asia are distributed, and what are the challenges faced by Asia as a separate continent or separate region. Right. So far we have discussed about some of the pressing issues when it comes to building this Asianness. Ideological issues. We have discussed some of issues related to systems of government and internal conflicts, civil wars in Asia, and interstate disputes that still unresolved in Asia. I have just given you a kind of a overview of those issues, and the next one is difficulties is in modernizing. So this is very much of a kind of a, rather than an interstate problem, this is problem with respect to communities, because some of the communities they resist modernization, or they resist certain changes, certain aspects of modernizations, and that had led to kind of ethnocentrism and prejudices. One group is some of the Islamic groups in certain parts of Asia, those who want to practice this hardcore Islam, or kind of a different interpretation of Islam, which is different from mainstream Islam, or some of the local versions of Islam that we see in Sri Lanka also. So Sri Lanka was also kind of influenced by these waves, right, that emerged in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. So these groups, they want to sort of practice a kind of a radical and more fundamentalistic method of Islam, right? Such as curtailing some of the rights of women, curtailing religious freedom, a lot of restrictions for sexual rights, child marriages are there. So this is not the kind of in Sri Lanka, for example, when we see we hear some of the stories from certain countries, it's very strange even for the local Muslims in Sri Lanka, those who are predominantly followers of Sufi Islam, which is very much of a moderate and peaceful version of Islam, and a traditional Islam which is practiced both in India and Sri Lanka. So this new hardcore groups, they resist some of the modern liberal democratic ideals, right? And that had led to cultural conflicts, and also some new developments of this particular phenomena is some of the traditional communities like Hindus, Buddhists in South and Southeast Asia have also kind of started a new wave of conflicts, particularly if we think about countries like Myanmar, Thailand, and Sri Lanka. Predominantly the Buddhist countries. So there is, a new wave of tension between Muslims and Buddhists. India, it had been a Hindu-Muslim conflict, had been there uh, right from the beginning. But they have, these conflicts have found a kind of a new nature of its own because of this fundamentalist trend that we see in Middle East. So currently, places like Iraq and Syria, uh, according to some terrorist studies experts like Professor Rohan Gunaratna, this region is the epicenter of Islamic terrorism, right? And he also kind of warns that there is also a risk of changing this epicenter from Arab or Middle East to South Asia and Southeast Asia, right? Because South Asia also being a population, having the largest population. So kind of, these radical Islams, they continue their brainwashing programs by using media, social media. So these are some of the issues that as communities, the Asians are facing. Some of the traditional communities are not in harmony with these extremist trends, and this will lead to some emergence of new conflicts in the Asian context. So there is also this urge from these traditional communities for these radical Muslims to modernize themselves, right? Rather than going back to the text with, with some fundamentalistic interpretations of the text, there is this thrust for them to embrace some new modern democratic ideals, right? Acknowledge women's right, give opportunities for women for education, ensure religious freedom, allow other religions to be practiced in those countries and societies, give sexual rights, and so on. And so this cultural conflict between radical Islams and some of the other communities have been developing in recent past, and it's going to be an issue in the future as well. So in addition to that, inequality, politics of inequality is also another growing problem in a number of Asian countries, because certain countries, even though they have a lot of wealth, the wealth is not distributed equally. For example, if we take a place like India, there are so many multi-billionaires in India, but also I think according to some estimates, it has more impoverished people than the African continent. So the disparity of income is huge and inequality is there. So one reason for that is in these countries, the governments, they practice what we call these neoliberal systems of governance, or neoliberal methods of governance, where the political elites in those countries, the politicians, the governments, instead of working in favor of the interest of the people, there is an alliance between political elite and big businesses. So decision making by those governments, or decisions that are taken with respect to economy, primarily taken to accommodate the interest of the big businesses, not the people that elect those governments. So neoliberal system means actually when there is an alliance between the political elite and the big businesses. So these governments, they facilitate the big businesses or investors to come and invest in those countries, give more opportunities for them, and as a byproduct of it, they believe that it will empower the people. It will bring economic emancipation for the people also, right? So this is the idea, but it has actually, there's a lot of evidence that this particular system has failed, and it has led to concentration of more money in the hands of big businesses and few millionaires or few owners of big businesses, and also impoverished a lot of people. On the other hand, world also had some different political system, what we call the social democratic system, where decision making is actually done in favor of the people. We call them social democratic systems. So alliance is with the political elite and the people. So one challenge in Asia is, if we are to think of a more people friendly or countable governmentality or governance, how this transformation can be made from neoliberal to a more social democratic systems, where economic decision making is done not to accommodate the interests of the big businesses, but the interest of the people, right? So Sri Lanka is actually no exception in this sense. If you think about the recent development projects and some of the decisions taken by recent governments, particularly after 1917, very much it's a kind of a a neoliberal system, and particularly after the war, with all these new projects, it's a kind of a neoliberal system that Sri Lanka also had, where it was government's belief that only the big business investment can bring the economic prosperity to the nation. Right? So this is a kind of a political economic issue that need to be sort of states to reconsider if they are to think of economic success in future. So one country where this has led to a serious conflict, even though it is considered as a minor conflict, the violence is not that minor, because there were a lot of cases of violence and insurgency. This Nascalite movement in India, particularly in this Red Corridor area, where a lot of land and natural resources belonging to Adivasis, indigenous people, have been given for big businesses for their investments. So this Red Corridor is an area where there are a lot of natural resources, minerals, and these land have been forcibly, people have been forcibly evicted and acquired by the state in order to be given for big businesses. So these peoples also face a lot of discrimination related to caste as well. So they have organized and revolted against the state, and that is what we call understand as Nascalite movement. And scholars like Arundhati Roy, who's a scholar and also a kind of a novelist, had written a lot about how people are being discriminated in India because of this government's alliance with big businesses, rather than the people, those who appoint those governments. So inequality is something that countries and so-called underdeveloped countries in Asia will have to address in future, the growing inequality and concentration of wealth in the hands of few. So finally, to wind up, so Asia as one region has a lot of challenges, as I have explained. And when we see this particular region, it's very much clear that it is not a place for a great deal of political homogenization, right? It cannot be another Europe, because it's very much diverse in terms of political ideologies, in terms of governance, and also there are conflicts that have lasted for so many decades. So it's immensely a diverse region. So it's also very difficult to think of any kind of homogenization. And also, we should not mistake Asianness as a kind of an essential idea, right, or essentialist category. That means that when we say Asianness, we should not think that there is something, something lasting there, or something that is there as an essence. And so there is no sort of an essence for Asians, right? Because Asia is very diverse, politically, ethnically, culturally, socially. It's a diverse region. It's difficult to see any homogenization, but also in that sense, it's very difficult to essentialize Asia also. And also, the term Asia, we need to sort of approach this Asianness from a syncretistic perspective. That means there is a lot that Asia can also learn from other regions, right? Not to replicate the same political systems in Asia, right? Not to replicate Western Europe or Eastern Europe or Africa or Latin America, but be more syncretistic. That means you can learn from them and see how certain aspects or certain practices with respect to political solutions, for example, can be practiced in Asia in its own way. So Western democracy may not necessarily suit as it is in certain contexts of Asia. For example, if you think about countries where there are tribal communities, right? The Western form of democracy may not be appropriate in those contexts. So there may be some other examples that can be. So being open to other areas and open to sort of kind of learn from other regions is very important. And also it's important to engage with these Western constructions about Asia, as I said in the beginning, because sometimes the Asia or Asian, the word Asian is kind of a stigmatized word to some Western colonial masters. And some of the Asians also think that, particularly South Asians, think that Western world is a kind of a safe haven for them. Because of a lot of pressing issues with respect to governance, civil conflicts, people also want to leave and go to Western. So because they see a better life in the Western countries, right? And also there is also this attitudinal problem that these countries cannot be developed, or they are more primitive, barbaric, savage, difficult to develop, those kind of attitudes. So unless this, some of these early colonial constructions about the West are kind of being internalized to a great extent, and it had led to sort of a great displeasure among Asians about their own countries, and supported by the surrounding political issues. So in that sense, I think there are so many challenges that Asian communities are facing, and these challenges do not have a straightforward answer. Even democracy itself, the Western democracy, may not be an answer for greater stability, because Asia, in that sense, very much diverse and complex in comparison to other regions of the world. So therefore, Asianness should not be constructed as an essential idea to say that we all have something lasting as Asianness, because that is not there. Because accommodating the diversity, acknowledging the diversity, homogeneity of the region is very important. But also to see, by accepting diversity, how Asians can cooperate with each other is what need to be studied and understood. So I hope that I have given some kind of an idea about what are the pressing issues that Asia as a region is facing, what are the political issues faced by Asia with respect to political ideologies, different systems of governance, internal conflicts, and interstate conflicts. Also, issues related to different cultures and how do they want other cultures to be modernized, and why some cultures do not adhere to it. And so those sort of new cultural conflicts emerging in Asia, and also finally the politics of inequality in Asia, because certain countries the inequality is also growing. So these are some of the issues that I see in the Asian region. And if Asia to become a more stable as well as a region with prosperity, I think these issues are the main challenges that Asia is facing at the moment. So with that, I would like to end up my short presentation, and I thank you very much for listening, and it is time for you to ask questions if any.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, we see countries like Iran, Iraq, and Syria in the Western Asia had been dominated and destructed by war. So as we know, it's mainly because they wanted to seize control of the rich oil producing Iranian gold region.
Yes.
So how this competition to claim the monopoly of oil is going to affect the politics in the Asian region, or how this is going to affect the balance of power within the Asian region?
Yes, that's a very good question. Yes, oil politics, it's very much central to Asia and part of the Middle East problem. And that is something actually I did not touch upon in my presentation. So thank you very much for raising that issue. So probably one way out of this is now Asia is very much entangled in this oil politics, Middle East region, and this importance of oil, right? If it continued to be like the same way, then certainly there will be a lot of international interventions also. But world is also moving towards renewable energy, and there are some alternatives to oil as well. So in that sense, probably in time to come, maybe after you never know that in several decades, the prominence given to oil maybe not that much. So in that sense, sometimes this oil politics in Middle East, the international interventions and attention on these areas might reduce as well. So that we never know. But as far as current political situation is concerned, yes, it is very much central, and it is going to affect the Middle East region very much. I don't know whether it answered your question. And someone is asking, where does Russia as an Asian country stand in this Asian conflict? Yes, Russia is actually spread across both Asia and Europe. Some say it's very much closer to Europe also, but anyway, when it comes to influencing Central Asian countries, and also Russia's relationship with some of the communist countries, those who are against this, Western liberal democratic countries, it's going to be crucial. And Russia is also becoming more stronger and stronger. So Russia's role is also very much crucial. And also, there was one time this China and Russia relationships also became very much disputed, particularly with the Chinese invasion of Vietnam, Sino-Vietnamese War. So Russia is again, it's yes, a big player, and it also invaded Afghanistan also at one time. So yes, so Russia's role is also um, very much crucial as far as Asia is concerned.
Sir, like
Yeah.
like you said, a barrier to modernization we see in Asia, like for example with like women's rights, is that those attempts are seen as like Western political ideology, like neoliberalism or things like that. And like a common solution is to like have like systems that are unique to Asia's culture, that will suit Asia's culture. But like, are there any examples where like that has been like successfully done?
Yeah. So are you asking about like alternatives to democracy? I missed some part of your question.
Or yes, for democracy or things like advancing women's rights, things like that, like things that aren't like Western feminism or Western democracy or neoliberalism, like any like Asian alternatives that we've had.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think maybe you should ask that question from an anthropologist also, who can give you a lot of examples from the local communities. So in Asia, actually, there are so many, alternative practices in local settings, where problems are discussed and problems are being addressed in a certain way. So that is only, I think, a matter of sort of bringing them into the mainstream and trying it out in probably in macro level scenarios. So some say that yes, there is no sort of a alternative to democracy. Democracy is the Western democracy so far has been the most successful form of governance that world has seen, but it has also its weaknesses. So I think to find out whether there are any alternatives practice, now one is this one ideal that has been brought into foreground is this what do you call this friendly dictator idea, right? In Sinhala they call Sonduru Ajnadayaka, right? So where a populist leader with the people's consent, controls the country for a long period of time until it achieves this stability and economic stability. But he's not so autocratic like most of the dictators. So it's a kind of a balance between this liberal democracy and dictatorships. So some of these ideas were actually brought in, and some say that Singapore also had that form of leadership. But other than that, it's quite difficult for me to give you an example from the bigger picture, from the macro level. But I'm sure that anthropologists will be able to give you a lot of examples from the local cultures where they had alternatives or systems that can be identified as alternatives to the majoritarian democracy that we practice. So this, for example, this Indian idea of consociational democracy, where instead of this majoritarian democracy, where the minority's concern is important to pass a bill, for example, in a parliament. So some say the roots are from Asia, of this old Lichavi model, where the consent of if the minority representatives from the minority oppose a particular legislation, then it can't go through. So that kind of ideas have also been discussed. So, so there are, alternatives to Western ideals in Asia. Only thing is that they have not come into foreground as dominant practices. I don't know whether it answered your question.
It did, sir. Thank you. Sir, can you just repeat the name of the democracy you said originated in India?
Yeah, it has roots. That is called consociational democracy. In Sinhala, we call it Samuha Sangata Prajatantra.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So there was another question. So do you think that Asians give themselves less credit for being developed as they tend to migrate to Western countries seeking for better life? Yes. Some Asians give less credit to their countries for being because of being underdeveloped. So they want to migrate. So Sri Lanka is one classical case. Also, there have been a lot of cases, issues of migration. So I was actually referring to this attitudinal problem also, like people being so pessimistic about their own countries. So it has some relation to some of these early constructions that West is superior to Asia, and then it comes with conflicts and all the violence, and then people kind of internalize that these countries cannot be developed. Normally, if we just ask someone in the road, some maybe who is standing in a queue or something, then that person might say, this country cannot be developed. So that those are some of the attitudes that are very much entangled with some of the early constructions about Asia as well. According, this is my personal view. So, but there are exceptions. Like, for example, if you think about Japan and South Korea, how they have achieved economic development. So this just the attitudinal transformation is what matters at the end of the day, I think. I don't know whether I answered that question. If you have any follow-up questions, please unmute your mic and ask. Maybe I haven't understood your question properly.
So it's not just countries like underdeveloped countries like Sri Lanka, but also like China and Japan. They also tend to migrate to USA for the, I don't know, the American dream or something.
Yeah, yes, that's a very good question. Yes. Now the problem is that now, for example, if you think about China, as I said, it's kind of a one-party rule. So even though it has achieved economic success, there is one whole side of life is missing, according to what people think. So, and that also has a truth in it. So they want to explore other countries and go. And Japan also, on the other hand, even though it has succeeded in economic development, if you think about other indicators like suicide rates, Japan always ranked high when it comes to suicide. So why suicide? Then there are other reasons, maybe stress, maybe not having societal relationships, healthy relationships, because they are very much kind of a automated population, like we continue to work like machines. So the human aspects of their relations, so the human flavor has deteriorated. So there are some other issues also. So then people tend to migrate into other countries as well. So yes, so in that sense, even like, now some people, now for example, countries like us, we want to emulate Japan or maybe Singapore. But have we done a kind of an assessment about what really our people, do we really want to be Singaporeans or Japanese or be Sri Lankans, right? So the materialistic development is one aspect, but also there are other liberties of life. So maybe the missing part, maybe they are finding them in another country. I'm not sure whether it answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you. It's a lot to think about.
Okay, I think that is it. I think so. You can proceed with the other formalities. Thank you very much for asking questions and listening to the presentation.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to deliver the word of thanks on behalf of the student podcast on cultural linkages towards an Asian ideology. First, I would like to thank our lecturer, Mr. Nuwan Herath, for sharing his time and knowledge with us and for delivering this important lecture amidst his busy schedule. Sir, your address set the tone for this course by clearly indicating the role of political issues and challenges in Asia. We are blessed to have you contribute to this course. Next, I wish to thank Dr. Hemant Premaratna and all other staff at KDU who have brought these lectures together. Thank you. Last but not least, I thank all participants from our university for joining us today. Your participation has made this lecture a successful event, and I believe it has provided you with an insight into the political issues and challenges of Asia. To conclude, let me once more express my gratitude to Mr. Nuwan Herath for delivering today's lecture. Sir, it's an honor to have you with us, and your time and efforts are deeply appreciated. Thank you.